I doing? I'm distracting you, you turd muffin.
Should we have some fun? Learn a little about U.S. history? Bit of both, then. Go. Welcome to Coffee and U.S. History in the Kitchen with Mr. Evans. And today's mug is Area 51 in Nevada. Ooh, you know, where they keep all the aliens. But I'm not allowed to tell you about that yet. So, today's topic, causes of the Great Depression. And this is one of those things that's a little bit historical debatable. And for people like me, that's part of the fun of history, right? Debating some of history. What are the real causes? What happened? Hey, what do you remember about world history? What do you remember about World War I? And when I say, what caused World War I? Somebody immediately goes, oh, I remember, some dude got shot. Yeah, and we all know that dude was Archduke Francis Ferdinand. We covered that in a previous lesson, right? And it's true that you could argue that the assassination of the Archduke caused World War I. However, that's a very simplistic answer. And if you were paying attention at all to my lecture on the causes of World War I, you know that I gave 4 other causes and 4 other reasons. The Archduke's assassination could be considered a cause. However, even if the Archduke would not have gotten assassinated, a lot of historians would argue that World War I was going to happen anyway. Maybe a month later, maybe 2 months later, something else, very likely, would have triggered that war. And so you could argue and debate the causes of World War I. That's part of the fun of history. Well, today we're talking about the causes of the Great Depression. And it's very similar. There are different historians, different economists who will argue over what exactly caused the Great Depression. Right? Remember during the 20s, we had Harding and then Coolidge. Hoover gets elected in 1928. And unfortunately for Hoover, the economy is going to crash and he's going to get all the blame. The first cause of the Great Depression is the stock market crash of 1929. So let's review stocks a little bit. Remember, you are buying a stock or a share in a company with the idea that as that company makes money, as it makes a good product, you will now get a portion of the profits. That's called a dividend, right? You'll get paid a little bit of the profits that that company makes. And so if you buy a good company that's been around for 50 years or 100 years even, right? As long as that company is making money, you are collecting profits. You're collecting a little portion, right? And over time, that can add up to a lot of money. But a lot of people get impatient. They don't want to wait for the years for the dividend checks to roll in. They buy the stock, and instead of waiting for years, they're thinking more on a scale of months, weeks, or nowadays even days and hours, right? I want to buy it. I want to hope that the stock goes up, and I want to turn around and sell the share price right away. Right? Well, couple vocab words you should know. When the price of the shares of the market is going up, call it a bull market. When the price is going low, down, it's a bear market. Obviously, what we want is a bull market. And that's what we had through most of the 1920s, right? Share prices are going up and up and up, so people are able to buy shares. A few weeks later, sell those shares and make a quick profit, make a quick buck. And people were thinking, oh my gosh, this is so easy. America is awesome. You could just make money doing nothing. Of course, that only works as long as the price keeps going up and up and up. So the next problem that compounded this is a lot of people were beginning to buy on margin, putting 10% of the stock price down and margining or borrowing the rest of the money for the stock, right? So really they're buying stocks that they can't afford, right? And they shouldn't have been allowed to do this. But people are getting way over their heads, right? And as long as the stock price keeps going up, you can buy, sell, walk away with money, and it's all good. But a lot of people own a lot of stock that they can't afford to pay off if the price goes down more than 10%, because that's all they put down for their down payment. I want you to think for a minute about what are the names of some of the local banks in your town. Go. Boy, can I get some help here? So, look, if you have local banks in your town, right, oftentimes those banks actually borrow some of their money from the Federal Reserve Bank in Washington, D.C., right? So this is Alexander Hamilton's old idea of a U.S. bank, right, which we know was eventually killed, but it has recently been resurrected in the form of the Federal Reserve Bank just prior to the 1920s. And what the Federal Reserve Bank does is it doesn't loan money to you or me as individuals. It loans money to the individual banks, oftentimes the ones in your town. And this allows the Federal Reserve Bank to help control our economy. Right? So if people aren't buying enough stuff and the economy is slow and they want to get the economy going, the Federal Reserve can lower their interest rates. That means the bank in your town can borrow that money at a lower interest rate, which means they can loan it out to you cheaper. Right? A couple percentage points may not sound much to you at your age, but if you're buying a house or a yacht or a ski boat or a brand new car, that cheap loan could mean hundreds, even thousands of dollars, and it may make the difference between whether you decide to buy the new car or house or not, right? So throughout the 1920s, the Federal Reserve kept interest rates pretty low, around 4%. This meant banks were loaning money like crazy to people, right? And this can be a good thing, but a lot of economists suspect that some of that money that was borrowed wasn't borrowed in order to buy stuff. Instead, people were making so much money in the stock market that some of that money kind of found its way back into the stock market as people were buying investments. Well, this drove the price of the stocks up way higher than they should have been, right? Basically, the stocks are way overinflated by the time we get to 1929. On a deeper level, though, the second problem, you can probably guess at this point, is people buying on credit, right? It wasn't just stocks people were buying on credit. People were going to department stores and buying things on what they called layaway. They, again, would put 10% down and purchase a new radio, a new vacuum cleaner, a new washing machine, and all that is great, but Americans were not used to having credit. Credit was a fairly new thing in the 20s, and people were just overextending themselves. They were buying all kinds of stuff that they really couldn't afford and were going to have a really hard time paying all the money back. And of course, when the piper comes due and they have to start paying it back, it's going to be a big problem, right? So stock market crash is one, buying on credit is two. Then the third problem is what we call bank runs or bank panics. And here's where the banking industry can take a big chunk of the blame for crashing the American economy. Because a lot of Americans said, hey, I want to play it safe. I don't want to risk my money in the stock market. I don't want to take my chances. I want to put it in a savings account in the bank where I can trust that it'll be there for me when I'm ready to go get it. The problem is some banks took that money and instead of being safe with it, and they were trying to make a quick buck like everybody else by, you guessed it, investing in the stock market. So when the stock market crashed, it brought down some of these banks who had been really poorly run. That means you go down to the bank to get your money, and guess what? You ain't getting it. It's all gone. So now, you're walking home and you're crying. You lost your whole life savings, and you run into your buddy, and you tell him how you had all your money in Bank A, and they lost it all, and you don't know what you're going to do. Well, think about your buddy. He doesn't have his money in Bank A. He's got his money in Bank B. But after hearing your story, what do you think he's going to do? Yeah, of course. Woo! Straight to the bank. Ooh, we might have a timeout here. Gratuitous cat shot. We're not quite sure of her name yet, but she's pretty cute. Here's the problem. If everybody runs down to Bank B to get their money out, Bank B may have done nothing wrong, but if everybody wants their money out of the savings account at the same time, that bank is also going to go under. There's a classic scene in It's a Wonderful Life, that black and white movie they show every Christmas that your parents make you watch, where George Bailey's getting ready to leave town on his honeymoon, and there's a big run on his bank, and he has to try to explain to everybody, right, that the money's not all sitting in the vault, in the safe. He can't pay off everybody at the same time. If he does, the bank's going to run out of cash, right? You're just not a warped, frustrated old man, Mr. Potter. Sorry, my Jimmy Stewart's a little rusty. So, look, some of the banks went under because they were bad. Some of the banks went under just because people were going to panic, right? So, now we've got 3 of the causes. The 4th cause, as so often happens, the government tries to step in to make things better and winds up making things worse. So we get a couple senators that are able to push through what's known as the Smoot-Hawley tariff. And at this point, you should know what a tariff is. Rack your brains. Yes, that's right. A tariff is a tax on imported goods. One of the reasons you might want to have a tariff is to protect jobs. And that's what Smoot and Hawley were thinking, right? Unemployment rate has skyrocketed. We're at 25% in America. They're trying to make people buy American stuff so that keeps the American factories operating and nobody else loses their jobs. Well, tariffs sound great. But the problem is when you put a tariff on another country, what are they probably going to do? Duh.
Oh yeah? You tariff me, I tariff you back.
Of course, right? Most countries aren't going to just sit there and take it. And that's exactly what happens with the Smoot-Hawley tariff. America puts up all these high tariffs on European products. Well, what do the European countries do? They put tariffs up on ours back. And this creates what is called a trade war, right? Where 2 sides that were trading to the benefit of each other back and forth now get in this tariff war and wind up halting almost all their trade. And in almost every case, that's bad for both economies. And most economists will say the Smoot-Hawley tariff did the exact opposite of what it intended to do. It actually made things a lot worse in America in the 1930s, right? And you can see the obvious implications for that today. Economists argue about tariffs. When are they a good thing? When are they not? And, what are the outcomes? And like everything I'm always telling you in this class, there's no such thing as it's good for everybody, right? There's no such thing as it's good for America. Every time you hear a politician say that, you should stand up and say, liar, right? It's always good for somebody over here, bad for somebody over here, or good for somebody over here, and bad for somebody over here, right? Well, pretty soon this depression spreads not just in America and Europe, but becomes essentially a worldwide Great Depression. Yeah, you got a question?
Can I go to the bathroom?
No. If anybody gets to go to the bathroom around here, it should be me. I'm the one drinking all the coffee. So, in the big cities, New York, Chicago, Philadelphia, Boston, unemployment rate going to reach 25%. People are going to be homeless, sleeping in the parks in their cars or in little shantytown shacks made of milk crates and cardboard and whatever they can find. Bread lines, people standing in line for hours sometimes just to get a little bowl of soup and a piece of bread, just to stay alive, right? Because they're starving to death without charitable organizations providing free food. We are also going to get massive deflation, right? So we know inflation is prices go up, deflation is prices go down, 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 down. Well, deflation sounds like a good thing. Prices are going down. Everything's cheaper, right, Mr. Evans? Woo! Well, again, that's good for some people. If you're lucky enough during the 1930s to have a job and have money and things are cheaper, your money's going to go farther. However, what about the people selling stuff? Ooh, not so good for them, right? So again, another example of it's never good for everybody. Something's always good for some people, bad for somebody else, right? In this case, if you're selling something and the price is going down, that can be pretty rough. So who gets hit the hardest? Again, as so often happens in this country, the farmers and ranchers, right? In the 1930s, prices start going down and they're having a hard time selling their products, right? Not only that, but when prices go down, they don't all go down the same amount, right? So let's think about it. Where are the farms and the ranches in America? Ding, 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 ding. That's right. Look, mostly we're talking about the Midwest, right? Iowa, Idaho, Kansas, Nebraska. We know this is where a lot of the corn and the wheat is grown and a lot of the cattle are out there grazing, right? But where are the people eating those products? New York City, Boston, Philadelphia, thousands of miles away. So you're a rancher in Montana. How do you get your hamburger meat to New York City, right? Well, you got to ship it on the railroads. Well, during the 20s, maybe, I'm just going to make up some numbers here, but maybe you can sell your hamburger in New York City for 50 cents a pound. But remember, you got to pay the railroad to ship it there. So maybe you're paying the railroad 25 cents per pound to ship your meat. Well, that's okay. You can sell it for 50, cost you 25. You're making 25 cents for every pound. You're doing fine. By the 1930s, though, we get deflation. And that means the railroad maybe has lowered their prices a little bit. Maybe it's gone down from 25 cents a pound to 15 cents a pound. That's great. Problem is, nobody in the city can afford your hamburger meat. Hardly anybody's buying. Unless you're selling it super, super cheap, nobody's going to buy it. So maybe the best you can hope to get is 10 cents a pound. Have you seen the problem yet? If you can only sell it for 10 cents a pound, but you have to pay the railroad company 15 cents a pound, you can't do it. You're losing money. So think about what happens in America in the 1930s. We have people on the East Coast starving to death that don't have enough food to eat. Thousands of miles away, we have food just sitting there going to waste. Something was terribly wrong with our system. One of the things that's happening right now in 2020, right, thanks to coronavirus, is we're seeing some of the same failures. Not on as big a scale yet, but we are seeing some of the same problems where, with all the restaurants closed down, there are certain food industries right now that are unable to sell their product, right? Only a small percentage is getting to the grocery stores. And so there are farmers that are losing entire crops. Blackberries, I believe, in Florida, for a later discussion. As if all this wasn't bad enough, Mother Nature dogpiles on, and we get what's known as the Dust Bowl, right? We get a major drought in a lot of these Midwest states. I'm going to let you research more about this later, but here's just a few pictures. You know, these storms look like clouds. They're actually clouds of dirt. And when that dirt hits your farm, boom, this is what it could look like, right? So you could see how it wipes out all the plants, a lot of the animal life, whatever you were growing, forget it, it's destroyed, right? So a lot of these people in the Midwest heard that the farms in California were still doing well. And some of them were. We weren't having this major drought out here in California. So what happens is a lot of families packed up everything they owned into their one automobile and they headed out to California. Woohoo! Well, these are migrants, right? Let's think about it. What's the difference between immigration and migration? Yes, they're migrants because they're immigrating from within their own country, right? From one part of their country to another part of their country. But just as immigrants are sometimes unwanted and picked on, so sometimes are migrants, right? So many of these families came out to California, and at first there were a few jobs, and they were lucky if they were the first ones here or timed it just right, and they got jobs. But many of them arrived in California with no money and no prospects and no place to live, and now the farms don't need them, and there aren't enough jobs for them either, right? So now they're setting up homeless camps and homeless shelters all over California. And of course, the Californians are not happy about that. So they're telling these people things like, go home, go back to where you came from. And they start calling these people Okies, right? You Okies, go back to Oklahoma where you came from. Well, a lot of these people might not even have been from Oklahoma. They could have been from North Texas or Nebraska or Iowa or some other place in the Midwest, right? But they all got labeled Okies, right? And oftentimes treated badly and told to leave. Some, through a lot of hard work, eventually settled in California and found a way to make it, right? And so a lot of the students I teach are actually the grandchildren or great-grandchildren of the Okies who came out to California IA. So here's to you, all my Okie students. All right. Well, by all this, you should know Hoover obviously is a pretty unpopular president. He's going to take the heat for 4 years of a bad economy, and he has almost no chance to win re-election. But he's going to run again, and you can guess he's going to lose and lose very badly, right? And so on our next lesson, we will talk about who comes after President Hoover and what his plan is to end the Great Depression.